709 Reasons Why is brought to you by Calman.
Hi, I'm David with Portrait Displays, and in this episode of 709 Reasons Why, we have Flanders Scientific's own Bram Desmet, all the way from Alpharetta, Georgia. Bram, thanks for coming in today.
Thanks for having me over, David. I appreciate it.
So, Bram, can you tell us a little bit about the history of Flanders Scientific? How did it get started? How did you evolve? Where did it all begin?
Yeah, so I kind of grew up around displays my whole life. My dad was an old Barco CRT salesman. Actually, he was one of the first repair employees for Barco back in the early 80s. So I've known displays my whole life, and he started a consulting company in the early 2000s, and I joined that company. And eventually, in 2008 is when we launched the Flanders Scientific brand. And we found a really good joint venture partner that's located in China, and we've been working with them ever since. So Zhengzheng Scientific and Flanders Scientific collaborate to make these displays. And yeah, that's how we got into the display space. It's a very niche space, obviously, but it's literally what I've known most of my life.
All right. So in 2008, so back then, just as in probably today, Sony was kind of the big cheese in the marketplace, right?
Sure.
The Sony CRT was probably still very popular. Just the transition was just starting to go LCD at that time, if I remember correctly. So what made you want to compete with the big boys? You know, the modern market is such a crowded space, yet Flanders has done so well with it. But what made you want to jump off the bridge?
Yeah, I think if I hadn't have grown up around it, and if my dad hadn't been an expert in that kind of field, and he was one of the big competitors for them in working with Barco, of course, we probably wouldn't have done that. But it's what we knew, and we thought that we could provide a lot of value there. So we were looking to do a couple of things. We were looking to provide excellent color accuracy and performance, but at a price that was a little bit more approachable or attainable by especially independent operators, because 2008 was kind of, the height of the financial crisis. And what we had is we had a lot of people who were going independent, leaving big facilities, and because of the democratization of the tools, were able to set up their own studios at home. So we really had a lot of success early on with people who were spending their own money, right? So when it's your own money, you're a little bit more careful. The joke was always, you don't get fired for, buying the big brand at a place, so you do the safe bet. But people who were out on their own and actually looking at the value proposition of what does this monitor deliver for the money were, more open to exploring other options. And we had a great deal of success with that very early on with independent post-production operators. And that kind of grew over time to where people who were also looking for color accuracy on set, as DITs became kind of a more kind of integral role to getting previs happening closer to set, seeing things, the way that DP ultimately wants that image to look, doing more of that color accurate monitoring earlier in the process. We had those people start to flock to us as well because they were looking again for good value, and they were looking at, having good color accuracy as well. So that's kind of the evolution of our company, is that we started a lot with with lots of independents, and then we moved our way to doing more and more with large studios, large post houses. So that's a big part of our business now, but we've never kind of forgotten what our roots were, and our roots were really those independent operators.
So really, at that time, it was kind of like market opportunity along with a strategy that you had. And the strategy was, can we deliver great quality at an aggressive price in a time where the industry was starting to move towards that democratization, where the tools were getting a lot less expensive. You didn't need to spend all the money on the server farm anymore. Things like Resolve were becoming almost free, if not free back then. And so you hopped into there at that nice little niche, and you've kind of been riding that wave.
Exactly. What we saw as a trend, and it's a trend that unfortunately still persists on the very high end of the market to this day, and we were guilty of it for a while with some of our early HDR displays because there's no way to do it more affordably. But we've always tried to, if we can, avoid this kind of trend of, it's always been $1,000 an inch, right? So it's like, we can get a 30-inch CRT for 30 grand. And that, we wanted to do something different, because if you want those independent content creators to produce good content, accurate content, and content that's consistent with the way that everybody else is doing it, you need accurate and accessible monitors at affordable price points. The guy that's, moved from a big facility to operating a post suite out of their basement is probably not going to be spending $30,000, right? So we've been guilty of going to those high-end monitors when we've had to, and sometimes there were no other options but to do that. But we, whenever possible, have tried our best to provide a lot of value. So that's been one of our big goals.
So let's talk a little bit about the product line itself. So I know it started out, I think, with LCDs back in the day, and it's kind of evolved into this XMP310 that we see here. But you also make things like the Box I/O. So what kind of markets do you kind of tailor your products to as you've evolved over the years with things like the LCDs and the OLEDs and the Box I/O?
I mean, our strength has always been in post-production and then color critical monitoring on set. So maybe not so much for people doing just framing and focus, maybe not an AC's monitor, but again, for DITs, for colorists, for editors, especially, we had a lot of success early on also with facilities with LCD monitors who wanted consistent monitoring for all of their editors. So they would buy, monitors for 40 edit bays, and they just want them all to be the same type of technology. They want them all to be easy to calibrate. And so we focused a lot on those types of products. So it did start mostly with LCDs because that was available at the time. But when things really took off with us was with our first RGB OLEDs. So we had the CM250, which was a 24.5-inch RGB OLED. And that really kind of overnight kind of doubled what Flanders Scientific was doing and got us playing into a little bit in terms of performance, at least, if not price, a little bit of that higher end kind of section of the market.
Okay. All right. So we have your XMP310 here. Can you tell us a little bit about what makes the XMP310 so special?
Yeah. I mean, what we love about this is that we feel like it's really bringing HDR monitoring into, again, a much more accessible price point. I said we were guilty of making expensive HDR monitors in the past, right? So we had, at one time a $55,000 31-inch monitor. And there were people who had to have that. But we knew that if you wanted to really have HDR adoption take off, the critical missing piece was affordable HDR monitoring. These QD-OLED panels have really allowed us to do that. So our first QD-OLED monitor was their 55-inch XMP550, which really kind of changed what you could do in the industry in that you could build single monitor rooms if you liked, which was kind of a cool concept. You had a large format monitor that was big enough for the client to see, but that was also reference grade to the point where a colorist could rely on it as their primary monitor if they liked. Now, there's still rooms where that doesn't work and you have two monitors, but the point is that you had this large format monitor that was delivering the type of performance you maybe only previously had seen on 31-inch displays. Obviously, when we released that, one of the first questions people had for us is, this is great, can you make it smaller? And on the flip side of that, the other half of people were like, that's great, can you make one bigger? So we released a 65-inch as well, the XMP650, and then we released the 31 as soon as those panels became available to us. The thing we were really waiting for on the evolution of quantum dot OLED panels was to get something in this size that was UHD resolution, because some of the early ones were not, and we thought it was critical to have an actual UHD resolution display. But that kind of hints at some of the things that we really love about quantum dot OLED. So quantum dot OLED is one of these first technologies that is really becoming ubiquitous across all segments of all markets, right? So it's not just a science experiment type $55,000 HDR reference monitor. You can get this technology in this reference monitor at a much more affordable price, about a third of the price that you would have paid in the past for a 31-inch HDR display. And you have something where now VFX artists can go and buy a computer monitor that's quantum dot OLED based, and you can have your editors using quantum dot OLEDs at this size. Perhaps you can have DITs using our new XMP270, so the 26.5-inch version that's nice and portable. And then the great thing about that is you create all this, again, this cohesive kind of ecosystem in the professional side of the business where, again, editors, VFX artists, DITs, colorists are all looking at quantum dot OLED displays. And then you can buy a premium quantum dot OLED TV at home. It's as closed loop as we've ever been. It's never happened to have this many sizes of the same type of display technology. And what we love about that is that provides an avenue for creatives to get their vision across from set all the way to the home in a way that's never been possible before.
Yeah, we like to call that here at Portrait Displays the lens to the living room.
Yeah, absolutely. Same concept. Same exact concept where we are really able to preserve creative intent throughout the entire pipeline. And that's another really important part about these smaller monitors, is that it's not just about the price, it's also the form factor, right? So previously, if you brought a 31-inch HDR display on set, it probably weighed 60 pounds. It probably had 4 fans. There was no way you were going to battery power those things, right? Because they were drawing like 400 to 600 watts of power. So these are great because you can battery power them. The 26.5-inch quantum dot OLED that we just released is not a lot bigger than our old 24.5-inch RGB OLED. It's actually only about an inch wider. It's the same height actually because we made the bezel nice and thin. It can be battery powered, and these things actually weigh less than our 24.5-inch monitors. So you've got a bunch of displays that are 14, 15 pounds. So truly portable, truly something that can be used in those on-set environments. And that has really changed the game because, again, form factor's right, and also price. Because the reality is you're never going to get good HDR adoption on set if it's a $30,000 monitor that no one wants to insure, everybody's worrying about breaking, in addition to it just being incredibly hard to move around.
Yeah, I've seen a little bit of that myself in my calibration days where I would see DPs trying to get a Sony on set, maybe an HX310 or BVM X300 back when that was the thing. And 30, 40 grand a monitor, and they'd have to get insurance, and the studio would say, well, wait, what are we doing? How much is this going to cost? How much does that add to the budget? And they knew that the insurance was going to break.
Exactly. And the thing that ended up happening is, what we saw as a huge trend is that most of the kind of mid-tier and lower programs would just skip HDR altogether, right? So you do everything in SDR. And then the problem with that is that then becomes what the creatives, the DP, everybody else, that's what they get used to, is that kind of primacy effect is what I like to talk about, right? So it's the first thing you saw. So then when you get to the grading suite, you're a lot less likely to want to take things or take advantage of the things that HDR offers to you because SDR is what you've fallen in love with. If you see the HDR early enough in the process, you are much more likely to push your boundaries a little bit more in post. So we think that's a really, really important part of the equation with that. And then even on those high-end productions, again, it was such an expensive monitor. Everybody's worried about breaking it. It wasn't particularly portable. So you might get like a pre-light day where you used it for a single day. You set up your looks. You just confident the workflow is probably going to work out for you. But you didn't really have that HDR monitoring through the entire production because no one could afford it. These have really changed that. I mean, you're looking at, again, our 27-inch monitors, 11 grand as opposed to 30 or 35 grand. So really has made this a lot more accessible. They're not much more expensive than our old HD resolution SDR RGB OLEDs were. I mean, those were like 8 grand and up, right? So at this sort of price, at this sort of form factor, it's really changing the game when it comes to HDR monitoring on set. And I think it's going to be one of the biggest changes that we see over the next couple of years. So I think we're going to see a lot more kind of entertaining use of HDR because there's going to be a willingness to explore that more because you can see it very early on in the process.
Okay, so we're going to see a sort of want in the industry to work more in HDR because they have that initial HDR experience on set, which was so hard to get prior to this technology kind of coming to fruition.
Exactly, and then you've done all your lighting, you've set up your camera, you've set up your looks to look ideal for SDR, and then the issue with that is you get to post and that's what you want to do. You want to preserve that creative intent that you had on set. Whereas again, if you saw that HDR early enough, it doesn't mean you have to, it doesn't mean you have to go with crazy APLs and make everything super bright or anything like that. But it allows you to experiment a little bit more with those specular highlights and those looks and really take advantage, again, of what HDR has to offer. And I think this was the critical missing piece. The cameras have always had the dynamic range, for a lot longer than the monitors had them. Post-production obviously had the ability to do HDR monitoring. It was really the onset section of the market that was missing that. Not only onset, but also, to be fair, even outside of our products, again, those, computer monitors for VFX artists. Well, now you can have quantum dot OLED computer monitors that play really nicely with a display like this.
So we've got the quantum dot OLED. Sure. You've got that throughout your entire XMP product line right now. What's the future? Is the future going to be quantum dot OLED? Is it going to shift to the next big thing?
The thing I really like about quantum dot OLED is that it's not a very static product, right? So a lot of the other previous HDR monitor technologies we had is like, all right, well, you had your light modulating cell layer panel. Everybody was using the same thing. There's only really been 2 generations of that. So there hasn't been a lot of evolution on those. This has seen a lot of evolution, right? So we got started with the 55-inch XMP550, which was already a Gen 2 quantum dot OLED. Our XMP270, just a couple years later, is actually already using a Gen 4 quantum dot OLED. So the materials keep evolving, and the really exciting thing about that is that it just keeps getting better, right? So like we've just introduced our XMP551. So that's the successor to the XMP550, and that's a 4,000 nit capable display. So we are getting to the point now where these things keep getting brighter. The off-axis viewing has always been exceptional. All those types of things, all these performance benchmarks everybody's looking for. But it just continues to improve, and we have more sizes to pick from as well, which is really great. So I think there's going to be evolution in sizes. We've seen an evolution in things getting brighter from 2,000 to 4,000 nits on the 55-inch displays. And then longer term, I think we might see, the technology that I kind of see as the current holy grail, and I could be very wrong about this. The display industry is fickle, as you know, and things often change very quickly. But ELQD, so electroluminescent quantum dot, is a technology that I'm personally really excited about. I think we're realistically probably about 4 to 5 years away from seeing true commercial products featuring that. But what I like about it as well is it's still a quantum dot based solution. So it should offer a really great perceptual transition from quantum dot OLED to ELQD. ELQD just gets rid of the OLED portion essentially, and it drives those quantum dots directly with electrons. So it's a really, really fascinating technology. It's not quite ready for prime time, but the same panel suppliers we work with on the XMP QD-OLEDs are working on those types of panel technologies for the future.
Okay, so with quantum dot, and even with some of this other stuff, we're starting to see in other areas of the industry, maybe not broadcast monitors, but we're starting to see more RGB LED displays. We can start getting those color gamuts out wider towards the locus, right? And so what do you think is going to happen there? Are we going to keep chasing BT 2020, or are we going to start to bring that back in so that we have some of these better perceptual matches between display technologies? Even though, as you said, we now have QD-OLED that's in small form factor, mid form factor, large form factor, so we can really have that experience all the way from the lens to the living room. But will it continue to grow? Will that color gamut chasing?
The mission that I've been on is to try to convince standards bodies to rein that in a little bit more. So the ship has sailed on Rec 2020 being a container. I don't know if we want to say we're stuck with that, but we're going to live with that. That is not going to change. That's how everything's encoded to the home already for HDR. It's all relative to Rec 2020, right? But in terms of actual mastering gamuts, what are all the facilities doing, right? You deliver to Netflix, they want a P3 gamut deliverable. You deliver to some of the other big streamers or studios, networks, whatever. They're asking for 2020 often, but they're asking you to limit to P3 within that. So if we're all limiting to P3 in effect, then why won't we just say, why don't we have these standards bodies, whether that's SMPTE or the EBU or whoever it may be, say our display mastering gamut shall be P3, for example, or whatever other, more relaxed kind of subset of that. So I've been pushing for that because I think that's what we need to be able to go back to the semiconductor manufacturers who are making all these panels to say, stop chasing 2020 because you're actually starting to cause problems, right? You're going to start to get into areas where technologies will start to look more and more disparate because we are chasing these primaries along the spectral locus of 2020, which means really, really narrow SPDs, and that increases things like inter-observer metamerism and all sorts of other issues. When it comes to projectors, you have issues with speckle and all these other things. So my thing is, it seems like most creatives are quite happy with P3 when we talk to them. So let's stop chasing 2020, say, yes, that's our encoding container, but for mastering display standard, why don't we go for something a little bit more restrained, like a P3 color gamut? And if we do that, again, go back to the semiconductor manufacturer, say, hey, all you have to do is hit 100% of P3. And if you do that, you probably don't have to go quite as narrow with those primaries. Now, whether that happens or not, I'm not sure. That's a little bit, wishful thinking, I guess. There's a standard currently, Rec 2020. All the semiconductor manufacturers have the same thing in mind. They want to hit as big a portion of that number as they can for marketing purposes. So we've been trying to engage people in the industry. There's some people doing some really great work on this who are trying to get the ball rolling on having this change. But I think until the standards change, unfortunately, we're going to see more and more of this chasing of 2020, and we all have to be ready to understand what those limitations are. And so one of my retorts to that, or one of my solutions for that, is at least if everybody's using quantum dot OLED, then at least it's the same display technology across all those different fields. And that will help a little bit. You won't have to worry with this, perceptual matching your 31-inch monitor to your 65-inch monitor in your suite. If they're the same technology, you've made your life a lot easier, right? And then you're just talking about really nuanced little things like, how does, angle of view affect how you perceive color, distance from the display, those sorts of things. But not, we have two wildly different SPDs that are making us see color differently.
So you'd like to see maybe a P3 be the target, and then increase the nits continuing up more, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000?
I think more nits is good. I think there's diminishing returns on that as well. And then you have to play this game of, especially when it comes to onset monitors, like going from 1,000 nits to a 4,000 nit display to a 10,000 nit display. Power consumption, heat dissipation becomes a much bigger issue. Maybe less so an issue in post, but the displays keep getting more efficient. That's one of the beautiful things about, possible future technologies like ELQD. In theory, you have even greater efficiency, so you generate less heat, so you get more luminance with less power, and so that's kind of what we're hoping for. We'll have to see how those things evolve, but certainly brighter is the thing that I would like. More bit depth is something I've always pushed for. Part of what we do is, we lobby the panel manufacturers for things that we think are important. And I don't think even wider gamut is really the thing that I want, but I do want more bit depth. That would be great to get panels that can, in theory, do 12-bit. But again, there's reluctance there because these panel manufacturers are not making stuff just for the professional market, right? They're making it for the larger consumer space where they're selling, instead of thousands of these panels to us, they're selling hundreds of thousands or millions of panels to big TV manufacturers and computer monitor manufacturers. And so we're trying to do our part to lobby for this. And I think what a lot of people miss is that nobody's really making panels just for our industry, because these are, the factory that makes these, the capital investment for the panels, panel manufacturing plant is $10 billion. So people always ask, why don't you make your own panel manufacturing plant? It's like, that's not how it works. We don't have the IP, we don't have the budget. Even the really big guys, they're usually doing contract manufacturing with other people, or it's a large semiconductor division of their company that's making this. And then they're usually selling it to a number of different companies, because that's the only way to get the volume going that is necessary to run these factories. Because you also have to typically run these factories 24/7, right? It's not something you can easily turn off and turn back on.
So what I'm hearing here is we need to put some links in the description down below and have everyone contact their panel manufacturer and let them know what you really want, so that Bram can get his higher bit depth and all of his features. So we're going to lobby together, everybody. So one of the things about the XMP series that we've been working on for a little while now is adding CalMan Ready support to the new XMP series, so that our users that use CalMan and want to calibrate the display are able to easily do so. Can you talk a little bit about the CalMan Ready support and the calibration capability of XMP?
Yeah, sure. So our big thing, as you know, is that we are really committed to an open calibration architecture, right? So we have our own integrated direct connect calibration. We support basically anything that can export into our 3D and 1D LUT formats. But having a tight integration with CalMan, I think, is important, because it is a very ubiquitous piece of software. We see a lot of our clients using it. And when we go into a facility and someone says, CalMan is my preferred calibration solution, instead of having to say, well, we want to say yes, right? We want to say yes. If that's what you're comfortable with, if that's what you want to use, then by all means, we want you to be able to use that. So we've done a lot of work on our part to try to support third-party partners like Portrait Displays, and we're really happy to see the CalMan Ready adoption happening on the XMP series monitors to make that process even easier and more streamlined for people who want to do those things. So yeah, it's really exciting. And it offers a lot of flexibility for custom workflows. We've been using CalMan for, as you know, a long time to do all of our outgoing QC reports on all of our displays. So it's been an important part of our history as a company to have a good relationship with Portrait and with the good operation with the CalMan software.
Okay, and we appreciate that. We've had a lot of fun working on the new XMP series, and that support is going to ship in 5.16.4. And so if you don't have it, you can download it from portrait.com. Bram, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. And Bram, if other people want to learn more about your monitors, where would they go?
Yeah, so you can just go to flandersscientific.com. That has all the information on all of our products, a lot of videos as well. And then I'd also encourage you to reach out. That's another thing about Flanders that I think is real important, is that you can pick up the phone, call us, you'll get a person answering the phone who is knowledgeable about the product and happy to talk to you about what will fit your needs best. Okay, well, Bram, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure having you. We hope you enjoyed the video. We'll see you on the next one.